Young ladies and gentlemen, greetings from your respective positions. Once again, you are welcome here on the Tribune of Awakening Consciousness. It is making international headlines. This surprising statement from the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte. Mark Rutte, through his statement made on April 12, 2025, he demonstrates fear. He states it clearly, the fear that NATO has regarding Russia, in relation to what Russia is currently doing. And it is not only his fear, but it is also the fear of the entire West. So, has Russia become so powerful to the point of instilling great fear in the Westerners? And especially in their largest military alliance, which happens to be NATO. In which domain is this? It is, that is to say, on the ground level, with Russia having finished dominating the Westerners on land, and Russia having finished dominating the Westerners in the air, thus in space. These Westerners, particularly NATO, are imagining things that Russia might be preparing against Western military satellites in space. So this means that after the war on Earth, it is now a war in space. It feels like we're in a Hollywood movie. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we will be discussing in this video conference, which I ask you to share as widely as possible. Share this video conference as much as possible and give it lots of likes. Don't forget to always leave a comment. The Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, is afraid. Westerners are afraid, very recently in fact. Western officials made a similar statement. But first, let's see what he declared. Then, after the advertisement, we will come back to touch on what some Westerners had declared. And then we will decipher. And the list here. Russia might be considering deploying nuclear weapons in space. So the West is scheming. Imagine in place of Russia. They say that Russia is preparing to deploy nuclear weapons in space. We will see the continuation of what Mark Rutte said. But already, what needs to be said is that Western officials had said that Russia was preparing to deploy nuclear weapons in space to shoot down Western satellites. It's laughable. Since already, in terms of the military capability of satellites that are in orbit, according to the official ranking conducted by Western institutes, China is in the first position. After China comes Russia. One of the pieces of evidence that confirms this is that in December 2023, in December 2024, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I don't know if we'll call him that, appeared before the US Congress. He pleaded the case of the army. He pleaded the case, not the fate, sorry. He pleaded the case of the army. And by pleading the case of the army, what did he do? He asked that the American Assembly and Congress ensure to provide the American army with a colossal and significant amount that would allow to finance the army, to ensure that the American army in space can have the same capabilities as Russia, or at least somewhat approach Russia's capabilities in orbit. That's what he had requested. The American Congress had said they would look into the situation, but that the funds allocated for the army could not allow for such an objective to be reached. So, you already have a difficult situation in front of you. So, even America, which provides security coverage for Europe, does not reach the level of Russia in orbit. The NATO Secretary General certainly knows this. He's doing it on purpose. So, Mark Rutte, he emphasized that Moscow's current space capabilities are lagging behind those of the West, compared to those of the West, which is completely false. He says this explains why the development of nuclear weapons in space could be an attempt to strengthen its position. That's false. They are just afraid. Otherwise, Russia's space capabilities far exceed those of the United States of America and the West in orbit, as has just been proven. So, they take this as an argument, and in their small-minded thinking, they say that this explains the fact that Russia wants to develop nuclear weapons in orbit to strengthen its position. They argue on the basis of what is needed to intimidate the world, to scare people, to present Russia as the negative element to be taken down. So, they say here, they warn that such actions, if it succeeds, it will violate the Outer Space Treaty, and it would constitute a serious threat. So, he first invents the thing. Russia has no intention of this, but moreover, he brings up a convention on outer space, and he says that if Russia does it, it will violate it. That, while they themselves are doing it. Whatever happens, if Russia wants, it can do it. So then, he indicated that NATO countries are preparing for new space challenges, sharing intelligence. On the contrary, that's the truth. They are the ones facing space challenges. Yes, and until then, the records are there. The very video where this American general was pleading the case of the American army before the US Congress in December 2023, you will see it was within the framework of developing the 2024 budget for the American army. So, there is that evidence there. So, they are the ones, on the contrary, who have a need. That NATO countries are preparing for new space challenges, intelligence sharing, the creation of national space commands, and the development of satellites. Smaller, more agile, and more secure. Russia already has all of that. Even to launch satellites into orbit, it is Russia that comes to help North Korea, Iran, etc. But they don't have that. They want to develop that. Now, to develop it for themselves, they need to find an argument. Pin that on Russia. So, he says this. He says that in recent years, space has become more crowded, dangerous, and unpredictable. Competition is intensifying, not only commercially, but also at the expense of our security. Do you see the dichotomy, the procrastination? While he himself just said, the Secretary General of NATO, he says that in recent years, space is crowded. This affects security, etc. Meanwhile, he says that NATO has new challenges. NATO countries must prepare satellites again to launch them into orbit. You see how many times the Westerners, they want it to be them only, not others. That gives them power. So, what else did he say? He also announced, for the first time, the extension of NATO's satellite surveillance of the Arctic. NATO wants to monitor the Arctic. However, it is an area that is regularly monitored by Russia. Here is another provocation. So, to better provoke Russia, they have to come up with something concerning Russia. So, then, they say that they announced for the first time the extension of NATO's satellite surveillance of the Arctic, citing the increasing military activity of Russia and China in the region. He himself cites that Russia and China have intensified their activity in the Arctic. And that's where NATO is going to conduct surveillance. You think that's not a provocation? He says this. He says that satellites can help us track land and maritime movements and ensure the security of our forces' communications. He highlights the importance of satellites in orbit. At the same time, a little earlier, he says that the existence of multiple satellites in orbit clutters the orbit and threatens security. So only they should launch satellites into orbit, not Russia, not other states. You see this contradiction and blatant provocation. They are going to monitor Russia and China in the Arctic again. Yet they are the first to set up, to install their surveillance. When Russia reacts, they will accuse Russia again. So, Ladies and gentlemen, that was the international news headline. Thank you for sharing it as much as possible. I will be back shortly with more news. This was the voice of your one and only samurai.